it's a really, auspicious time to learn together as we start Bereshit, as we start Genesis, literally Bereshit from the beginning this week. And I think, there's a lot of complexity going on at the moment. Those of you that were at the beginning of the discussion, we were talking about how it's fun not to tune into the news these days, whether it's what's going on with politics in North America, in the United States, whether it's what's going on in Israel and even broader around the world. And so I think, our job as Jews is to really, Ezu Chacham Alomed Mikol Adam, who's wise, someone who learns from everyone. But we also, in addition to our universal wisdom where we can learn from everyone, we have a particular wisdom. We have our own Torah, and that has served as our moral, as our moral compass, generation after generation. And it really has provided a prism by which we can look at, a lens to look at the world. And so what I'd like to invite us to do is we're going to basically take the first three scenes, so to speak, or the first three major episodes of the Torah, this week's parasha, next week's parasha, and the one after that, and hopefully provide us with a little prism by which we can look at the ethics of responsibility, something that's more important today than ever before, something that's of course relevant to each of us individually, but definitely collectively. And we want to look at the interplay between those two things. What's interesting is that the Torah is not a linear text. So with all linear texts, you read them like this. I'm looking for any books next to me. So a book, you literally, turn the pages, and then you get to the end of the book and it finishes. And you can read the book again, but it's not meant to be done like that. That's revisiting the book again. A Torah, on the other hand, is not linear. It's cyclical. It's a scroll, which means technically it should roll one into the other. If we look at the last word of the Torah, which we read last week, it's Yisrael, right? The first word of the Torah that we're reading this week is Bereshit. The last letter of Israel is a lamed, and the first letter of Bereshit is a bet. Now, if they just end like a linear text, it stops at that. But if you read it as a cyclical text, you read the last word into the first word as a continuous experience and journey. And lamed bet makes the word lev, which is heart. As long as the Jewish people continue to learn, the heart of the Jewish people continues to beat. And that is what sustained us as a people. And each time that heart continues to beat, and each time we read it over and over and again, we find something new, some new depth. I'm taking on a challenge with Penina this year that we're trying to take an idea from the parasha and put it into one image for social media. In the past, I wrote something longer, looked at it always with a different perspective. But each year, even though we revisit the same things, we see them in a new way. So let's dive into back to the basics. Dive into the stories that we all heard as kids and see if we read it slightly different as we start with this new perspective. So we're going to dive straight in to one of the most famous episodes of the Torah, and that is the story of Adam and Eve. So I'm going to invite, if anyone wants to please read, they are welcome to. So let's start this here. Okay. So we're going to look at the first act, which is Genesis chapter 2 and 3. And it's the story of Adam and Eve, the very famous story. So let's see what happens here. So what I want to do in each of these episodes is I want to look at the sin and I want to look at the response. Very, very simple. So does anyone want to read in Hebrew or English or both the first sin with Adam and Eve? And I've taken select verses from each. So this is from chapter 2.
I'll go.
Okay, go for it.
Okay. Now the Lord God took the man and he placed him in the Garden of Eden to work it and to guard it. And the Lord God commanded man, saying, of every tree of the garden you may freely eat. But of the tree of knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat of it, for on the day that you eat thereof, you shall surely die.
Okay, fantastic. So first of all, we see what our job is to do in the world, right? It's l'ovda u'l'shamra. In the Garden of Eden, our job is to work it and to guard it. That's what our role is here. Second of all, God gives he says, of every tree of the garden you may freely eat, except for this tree. And if you do, then you're going to die. So basically, what I want to look at is what is the sin here. If you were to say, if you were to choose what the sin is, what would you say is the first sin? Right? This first sin is that they eat from the tree. Very easy. But I've got a more fundamental question. Why is that wrong? Why is it wrong to eat from this tree? What makes it the wrong thing to do? It's quite a simple answer as well.
God told them not to?
Exactly. The only reason that law exists is because God explicitly says, don't do that, right? There's no other logical explanation. It's not like you could walk around the Garden of Eden and intuit that you shouldn't eat from this tree. The only reason you don't is because God says not to. And what I think this gives birth to is a fundamental concept that is the basis of any law system, which is basically objective morality. Why is this moral or immoral? Why is this ethical or unethical? Why is this right or wrong? For one reason, because objectively it's wrong. You couldn't necessarily intuit it. God has decided it's wrong, and therefore it's wrong. The result of not respecting this type of objective morality has given way to some of the greatest travesties that have ever affected or afflicted humankind, right? It's insane. But we've seen the most terrible things that have happened to humanity through these types of moments. You think about, the times of World War II. You think about Stalin. You think about Hitler. You think about the Holocaust. The whole idea there was that instead of having an objective morality, that murder is wrong, right? Because it says in the 10 Commandments, there was a subjective morality whereby someone decided that which was right and wrong by their standards. And therefore, it actually became a mitzvah to kill someone that was different in a certain specific way. And they create their own subjective morality. Comes along right at the beginning of the Torah, the first sin is the sin against objective morality. And that's what we see in this moment. What about the response? So the response is also very interesting, right? We see here, I'm going to ask you, Shauna, to continue to read just for this first one. What is the response? What happens?
And the Lord God called to man, and he said to him, "Where are you?" And he said, "I heard your voice in the garden, and I was afraid because I am naked, so I hid." And he said, "Who told you that you are naked? Have you eaten from the tree of which I commanded you not to eat?" And the man said, "The woman whom you gave to be with me, she gave me of the tree, so I ate." And the Lord God said to the woman, "What is this that you have done?" And the woman said, "The serpent enticed me, and I ate."
Fantastic. So, there's a lot of questions that, again, we've heard the story before, but there's a lot of weird questions. Like it says, Vayomer lo ayeka, Hashem says to him, "Where are you?" Well, God doesn't know how to see where Adam and Eve are. God isn't confined to physical reality. Surely he can see in the first verse where Adam and Eve are. Why does he need to say, "Where are you?" What does that mean? Right? Then they're afraid because they're naked. What does that mean? They hid from God. Again, you can't hide from God, right? God sees this entire reality. And then the classic blame game, the first episode of the classic blame game. Adam blames Eve. Eve blames the snake. Each blame each other. And we see a massive loss here. So we saw the first sin was against objective morality. What is the negative that we see in their response? What is an abdication of? So it's an abdication. First of all, big welcome to my good friend Ari Ackerman. It's great to see you here from New York. And to Leela Gitler, thank you so much for joining us. This is an abdication of personal responsibility, right? Adam did the wrong thing, right? Adam didn't have to eat if he didn't want to. No one shoved anything down his throat. Yes, someone could encourage, could motivate, could entice you to do something, but it's your fault if you do something like that. He blames Eve. And then Eve straight away blames the snake. Again, no one forced her to do anything, but the snake enticed, encouraged, but it's still her fault. This isn't just general responsibility. This is specifically personal responsibility. This is really where we see the birth of personal responsibility, and all responsibility stems from the place, first and foremost, of personal responsibility. So that's the first act. That's the first scene, Adam and Eve. The sin is objective morality. It was wrong because God said it was wrong, no other reason. And the response was a lack of personal responsibility. We're going to continue this theme as we go on to the next episode. I'm going to invite someone else to please read as we go into the next episode, which is that of Cain and Abel. The first episode of fratricide, the first episode of a sibling killing a sibling, which is in Genesis chapter 4. Again, I just picked two verses here to share with us. So if anyone wants to read for this episode. Alex, do you want to read for us?
Certainly. Vayomer Cain el Hevel achiv, vayehi beyotam basade, vayakam Cain el Hevel achiv, vayahargehu. Vayomer Cain el Adonai gadol avoni min neso. And Cain spoke to Abel his brother, and it came to pass when they were in the field that Cain rose up against Abel his brother and slew him. And Cain said to the Lord, "Is my iniquity too great to bear?"
Fantastic. So now we see, we picked two verses here, verse 8 and verse 13, and the Torah sounds better with an English accent. But what is the sin here, right? If the first sin was objective morality, what is the sin here? Why was it wrong for Cain to kill Abel? What was he contravening? What was he doing wrong here? So I think a hint to it is in the second verse we brought. Sorry?
Well, is it communal responsibility or my responsibility towards another human being?
Yes, but what makes it, so we'll get to the response in a moment that will relate to exactly that responsibility. But what is the sin? Meaning that, why is it wrong? If the first thing was wrong because God said it was explicitly wrong, how was Cain to know it was wrong to kill Abel? It sounds silly because we've been entrenched in a society from the Ten Commandments, from our law that says that it's wrong to murder someone. But that concept of murder wasn't invented as a sin. So why is it wrong? So I think the answer is the second verse. What does Cain say? That his iniquity is too great to bear. I.e., he intuits, unlike the tree, he feels that he's done the wrong thing and it's just too great. It's bearing down on him. He feels it, right? This is what we call in philosophical terms natural ethics. This is something that you can feel, right? At the end of the day, you put a child in the jungle and they grow up in the jungle. They wouldn't necessarily know not to eat the tree of good and evil. They wouldn't necessarily know, intuit that you should keep kashrut. They wouldn't necessarily intuit these things. But if they grew up in a society and saw an older person that was struggling to cross the street or they dropped something, you'd think that they'd intuit naturally that they need to help the other person. This is really natural ethics. The sin here was what human beings should know as their basic core essence, that they should help one another. And what's the response, Alex?
Vayomer Adonai el Cain, ei hevel achicha, vayomer lo yadati hashomer achi anochi, vayomer, ma asita kol dmei achicha tzoakim elai min ha'adama. And the Lord said to Cain, "Where is Abel, your brother?" And he said, "I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?" And he said, "What have you done? Hark, your brother's blood cries out to me from the earth."
Fantastic. So what's the response here, as you said before, in terms of responsibility?
It's my responsibility to the other person. And he says, "Am I my brother's keeper?"
Exactly. It's the absolute abdication of interpersonal responsibility. If the first was personal responsibility, looking after your own actions, this is interpersonal responsibility. Am I my brother's keeper? Do I need to worry about what he does? I just want to show one little interesting thing. We go back a verse. It says, Vayomer Cain el Hevel. And Cain said to Abel, Vayihi biyotam. It says, Cain said to Abel, and it came to pass. What's the obvious question? What did Cain say to Abel? It says Cain said something to Abel. Well, what was it? And I believe, what's the next thing that happens? He kills him. I really believe that if we try to think what is at the root of Cain and Abel's disagreement, what led to the murder, at its fundamental basis, a breakdown of communication. Cain spoke to Abel, He opened his mouth, but he didn't actually say anything. Abel didn't actually hear anything. If we think about what's going on in the world today, if you think about Democrats versus Republicans, if you think about the breakdown of basic communication, the way we live in our echo chambers that reinforce our own ideology to the extent that we don't even hear the side of the other, whether it's good or bad, whether it's right or wrong. There's a basic breakdown of communication in this episode that leads to fratricide, the first episode of murder, the first episode of a sibling killing another sibling. And this is what we see, unfortunately, today. People are getting killed because they're not communicating. Of course, there's a lot more to it. But basic communication is one of the things sitting at the foundation of what we're losing here. And this leads to a lack of interpersonal responsibility. Am I my brother's keeper? Such a famous verse that we always look at. But how do we think of the other? How do we look after the other? So many people are saying, well, it's okay what I look after myself when it comes to Corona, but not others, right? And this is really looking even within our family. Those people that went out of their way to look after loved ones, right? This is what it's referring to. Taking on personal responsibility is Adam and Eve, and interpersonal responsibility is Cain and Abel. Adam and Eve was a sin against objective morality. It was wrong because God said so, and there's nothing we can do about it. Cain and Abel was a sin against natural ethics. We should intuit that we should do the right thing. A lot of what we can find in this world is there based on how we act, how we see. We can intuit it naturally. And then on top of that, we need a moral compass like a Torah and other people's traditions, a legal system to be able to help guide us. The final and third episode I'd like to visit, which we're going to be reading in a few weeks' time, is Parashat Noach, right? Is the famous story of Noah's Ark, right? So what was the sin with Noah's Ark? Let's go visit that, and then we're going to bring this all together, right? So Noah's Ark, which is chapter 6 of Genesis, which we're not reading this week, but we're going to be reading soon. Can we ask for a third speaker? Someone else that wants to read this one? It's a little bit longer, but something to complement the Canadian and the English accents from Sean and Alex.
English or Hebrew?
South African from Sydney. That sounds fantastic. Can read it in English, Sydney. Sydney is coming here from Johannesburg, even though his name is Sydney, which sounds Australian.
Okay, these are the generations of Noah. Noah was a righteous man. He was perfect in his generations. Noah walked with God. Now the earth was corrupt before God, and the earth became full of robbery. And God saw the earth, and behold, it had become corrupted, for all flesh had corrupted its way on the earth. And God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth has become full of robbery because of them. And behold, I am destroying them from the earth.
Okay, fantastic. So we picked a few verses here. First of all, we see that Noach is perfect in his generation. He's a tzaddik, he was tamim, he was pure, he was fantastic. Second of all, we see that there was corruption. In Hebrew, it says that there was chamas, right? So chamas has always been a bad thing. But here it means violence, robbery. There's different definitions of exactly what it means. And God saw the earth, and behold, it came corrupted. It wasn't just that this thing was happening. The entire earth became corrupted. It became part of that, part and parcel of everything happening. And basically, God says we need to do a giant reset here. This society is just not working. This just isn't happening. So I'm going to come back to the sin in a moment. Let's just read the response while Sydney's on a roll. Well, actually, let's come back to it after, Sydney. We'll come back to it after. So I want to try understand, if the first sin was personal responsibility, taking for myself, is the second was interpersonal responsibility, caring about those around us. What was the third sin? What would you say is the sin of Noah's Ark? So I think that
group responsibility.
What kind of responsibility?
Societal.
Fantastic, Alex. Societal responsibility, collective responsibility. Society worrying not just about themselves, not just about their family and those around them, but even those beyond that, right? The implications that we have right here, right now, can affect everyone around us. I mean, there's no greater time than in the middle of international pandemic. to think about the influence we can have, what one country can do to another, what one individual can do to another within their society, within their own family, and even within the entire world, right? Something that started in one country was able to infiltrate the entire world. So how do we do that? How does that happen? And this is societal sin. When something gets this bad, you have to reset. Right? I feel in a sense we're going through a reset now, right? In some sense, we're resetting as humanity. We're going through this entire process, and we're trying to look at what we can do in the broad sense. So a combination of a lack of personal responsibility and lack of interpersonal responsibility can lead to this lack of a society as a whole, and it can really create this terrible plague. What's the solution? What does God propose as a solution? And we'll just read this final slide. Sydney, if you can carry on for the response.
Sure. Make for yourself an ark of gopher wood. You shall make the ark with compartments, and you shall caulk it both inside and outside with pitch. You shall make a skylight for the ark, and to a cubit you shall finish it to the top, and the entrance of the ark you shall place in its side. You shall make it with bottom compartments, second-story compartments, and third-story compartments. And I will set up my covenant with you, and you shall come into the ark, you and your sons, and your wife and your sons' wives with you.
Okay, fantastic. The response is you need to make an ark. You need to bring your family into it. The famous story that we all know. Now, one question that I never, ever, ever heard asked from anyone, and I looked this in lots of places, is why does God get Noah to build an ark? I can think of lots of creative ways. This is God. He can do anything, right? If you really want to reset the world, put everyone on Mount Everest. If you want to reset the world, take everyone to Mars. Put an incredible igloo over them. We've seen more miraculous things that happen in Egypt. Why do you need to build an ark? Bring all the animals, bring all the families, and have this insane plague. So does anyone have any ideas?
To teach them to work together, to live together for a few days. Enough time to make sure it's going to work out next time.
Amazing. So develop that a bit further.
This was a closed society. They had to learn to live together. The Sheva Mitzvot, the Noach, were taught to the sons of Noach to teach them what are the rules to basically build a basic just society. And it was the prototype of that society that was the Ark.
Exactly. I want to read you a famous midrash that's never been cited that's not cited in this context, but it's something that is, fantastic midrash that I think speaks to this. And the midrash goes like this. It's from Leviticus Rabbah. It's from Vayikra Rabbah. It says, a man is in a boat and he began to bore a hole under his seat. His fellow passengers protested. What concern is it of yours? He responded. I'm making a hole under my seat, not yours. They replied, that is so, but when the water enters and the boat sinks, we too will drown. He says, I spent a lot of money to go on this cruise, right? I got my beautiful suite here. I can do anything I want in this suite. And they're saying, yeah, but if you drill a hole here, everyone's going to sink. I believe exactly what Michael is saying, that perhaps the reason that this story that we always see about as kids, it's not just a fantasy, it's not just exciting, it's not just fun, it's not just a great Hollywood movie to build an ark. It's a fundamental incubator in the ethics of responsibility. And specifically in the sin that we saw here, societal, collective responsibility. Imagine having to pick up the poo of an elephant. Imagine having to be able to look after the lions and the monkeys and all the different animals that are there. There's nothing further from you, especially if you just lived your life, than having to be a zookeeper for thousands of animals and insects and all different things. If you can worry about looking after these animals, maybe you can think about those around you, those in your society, right? Those that even are different to you, like animals are. Even though Noah was a tzaddik, he's seen as like a child tzaddik because he never intuited on his own. He only did what God said. He did the objective morality, but he didn't intuit the natural ethics. Why didn't he invite others onto the boat? Why didn't he expand his boat? Why didn't he bring more? Because the sin of the society at the time, well, let me ask this question. What is the root of every single sin? If we see each sin as a symptom of something deeper, think of any possible sin that exists, right? what do you guys think is the root cause at the bottom of any sin? Right? What character trait? So Ari Ackerman wrote jealousy. Definitely jealousy. Right? What's even at the root of jealousy?
I was going to say a putting of yourself above anything or anyone else. So there's an egotism to it, to an immorality.
100%. Say that in one word, David. Self.
I feel like I'm back. Help me, Benji. Help me.
It's
Self-importance,
right? It's being selfish.
I was going to say narcissistic, but
yeah. Narcissism, right? We're being accused of being like a selfie generation. But yeah, it's narcissism. It's selfishness. It's focusing just on yourself. Exactly what you said. Every single sin. Think of any sin. Think of the most terrible sins. What is murder? Murder is me believing that you should not be existing in this world for whatever reason that I'm trying to do, right? What is, God forbid, something terrible like rape? My desires are more important right here, right now. What is something even on a minor level? Skipping in a line, right? Stealing. It's me deciding what needs to happen because I'm putting myself, as David says, narcissistically, selfishly, I'm putting myself in the center. The only way you can deal with that selfishness is with ultimate selflessness. We need to build an ark. And that's what happens with Noah's ark. And from that, the entire society grows. And as I said, even Noah wasn't immune to his selfishness. He was a selfish tzaddik, right? He worried about his own little area. He worried about his own family. He didn't even go beyond that. So even he suffered from that selfishness. Even though he didn't sin actively, passively he did sin in a certain sense, or there was an element of a deficiency when we compare him to other tzaddikim like Avram. So we see this concept of subjective morality, of objective morality, and now we see this concept of societal sin, of collective sin, of how we deal with people beyond our area. And I think it's really critical for where we are now. We say, in Pirkei Avot, Im ein ani li mili, if I'm not for myself, then who is for me? Ukshani latzmi mani. But if I'm just for myself, then what am I? V'im lo achshav matai. And if not now, when? How can we act about this? Alex got a question.
I sort of agree with you in terms of the sort of mitzvot that are like what they ben adam lechavero, of selfishness. But to me, like breaking Shabbat, not keeping Shabbat, or eating a ham sandwich, or it doesn't exhibit selfishness. Number one, and then number two, I've always felt that the story of Noah is a little bit selfish on God's side in terms of, like, he's acting a bit, and it might sound a little bit, I'm not blasphemous, I'm not trying to say that, but a bit sort of babyish. It's like, oh, all these people have reacted this way, I'm just killing off everyone, and then I'm just going to, I'm going to get on with it, and I'm just doing it again. It sounds a little bit like a tantrum. I don't know. Those are two things, sorry.
No, so in terms of the first thing, just clarify your first question. Are you saying it doesn't seem selfish? It seems selfish to not worry about other people.
Yeah.
But ben adam lemakom, laws between you and God, that doesn't.
Yes, I don't see why that's selfish.
So basically, you've got. I mean, this is a big philosophical, fundamental discussion, which I'm going to try answer in 2 minutes, but we can explore it separately. And that is, you got to ask yourself, why did God create the world? I don't know if anyone's ever asked themselves that question, right? Why would God create the world? And there's a lot of massive fundamental questions like that. But if we accept the purpose of the Torah is for us to essentially do the best we can as individuals to grow as much as we can, as families to grow as much as we can, as societies to grow as much as we can, and really to heal the fractured world around us, then whether it's a commandment between us and God or a commandment between us and other people, what we're training ourselves and sensitizing ourselves to do is to really respect the basis of this moral compass. And therefore, if I'm, it's all well and good for me to not kill another person because I think it's wrong to, but what happens in a time when I think it's fine to? What if I think that's really wrong thing to do? If I don't have an objective morality that's going to be able to ground me, then I can go and do things like that. what happens is that if I build again, I'm not sure who here believes in God, who doesn't, but the concept of believing in something that is beyond time and space, that has the capacity to be able to have an ultimate truth, even if there's different shades within that, but an ultimate truth, it means that in the time when my natural ethics are tested, when my interpersonal relationships are tested, when I'm not doing the right thing to other people, there's an arbitrator for that. And by me deciding something as small as kashrut, right, and self-discipline, when it comes to being mindful about what I eat, how I speak, what I do, that is sensitizing me to accept in an almost intellectually humbling way that there's something beyond myself, that even if when it comes to other people, that is also a problem. And that, I think, relates beautifully to what we said in terms of first it comes objective morality, and then it becomes natural ethics, because both really complement one another. Unfortunately, and this is another discussion, but we do see some people that just care about the objective morality side, that, try and go into the Bein Adam leMakom, between them and God, and they forget about the rest of society. That is terrible, right? That is losing the whole point of what it is, because they're missing the point. They can keep Shabbat as beautifully as they want, right? But if they're speaking badly about people, if they're doing bad things, then there's a huge tenet that's missing. And the same on the flip side. If all they do is what they think is right, but they're not respecting a broader society, they're not part of something bigger than themselves, then also there's something lacking in it, because they've almost deified themselves. They've almost put themselves as the arbitrator and the person they think themselves as God to decide what's right and wrong. And by the way, in Israel at the moment, we're seeing that a lot, right? A lot of us think this is a stupid rule. This is silly. Those people are bad. Like, if the Haredim are acting like that, why can't I protest? If I'm protesting like that, then why can't I go to shul, right? Why can't we look at shul as good or bad and looking at protesting as good or bad, but separately, right? We don't need to blame the other in order to be able to decide what we can do. In terms of the second question you asked about God, look, I don't presume to know why God picked this specific way, but really the idea is that the Torah is less of a history book and more of a book that's there to teach us lessons. And I think that the result of what's happened because of this, the deep depth of what it means to be able to build a society based on collective responsibility, caring for one another, I think was a powerful enough lesson to teach us that. I think what God is teaching us really is there is a final straw. Don't think that there isn't limits to lack of responsibility. Okay, you don't take responsibility for yourself. I can accept that, Adam and Eve. Okay, you're not going to accept responsibility for your family. I can accept that, Cain and Abel. But if you're going to let people pillage and be violent and steal and loot on a societal level, when that's what everyone's doing, there's absolute anarchy, that's not acceptable for humanity. Adkan, that's where it stops. God ultimately, as we read in the final verse that Sydney read so beautifully, he establishes a covenant, right? That it's not going to happen again. But that's only because us as ambassadors of this moral compass are there to try and make sure we never ever, God forbid, basically fall to such a bad depth to this area. And by the way, we see all different societies. This is the only time we see it on a mass level. But societies like Egypt that fall into this terrible immorality, or Rome, or all these different places, they end at a certain point, right? We can't think that any empire is going to last. Just because the United States of America for the last decade has been this incredible superpower does not mean that in a century time, it is going to stay that superpower. Unless as a society, people really build that moral fabric, then you can't have any expectations in life. And while I don't know why God did it exactly, I think that the why question can be somewhat, freezing. But the now what question, what do we do about it, I think has huge import, has a huge lesson for each of us. And I want to end with this beautiful idea for those that understand Hebrew, which is achrayut, which is responsibility, right? We're talking about responsibility here. So how do we make up the word achrayut, responsibility? The first letter is aleph, right? We talked about moral responsibility. We talked about objective morality. Objective morality is aleph, it's Elokim. It starts with something beyond ourselves. More than Elokim, it's ani, it's anochi. It's me, myself, and I. It's all about personal responsibility, what we said at the beginning. That is the whole story of Adam and Eve. If you can't take responsibility for yourself, then it stops there. Nothing else can happen. right? Because if you don't practice what you preach, if you want others to worry about their responsibility, if you say everyone else needs to wear masks, but you don't yourself, right? That's one of the things we've seen in Israel that has been such an outrage for people, right? There's certain politicians that came down very hard on making sure that everyone wears masks, or that everyone social distances, or that everyone doesn't invite people to their homes, etc. And they broke that, and that really outraged people. Again, it's about us looking at ourselves, but that's the impact it has. The second letter, you go to the next letter, is Aleph Chet, is Ach. What is Ach? It's your siblings. It's your family. Once you've done the first concentric circle of the personal, you need to then think about the familial. How do you respect those in your family, those around you? We saw with Cain and Abel, Hashomer achi anochi, am I my brother's keeper? Yes, you are. If you have a sibling, if you have a parent, if you have a cousin that's in need, you have an extra responsibility to help them. And that extends beyond as interpersonal responsibility, not just ourselves, but those around us. We go on to the next one, we add the next letter of Achrayut as we carry on through it. Aleph Chet Reish, Acher, the other. It's not enough just you. It's not just enough your family. We talked at the beginning, before we went into the particular, about the universal. We have an obligation to others around us. You know, as a society, as Israel, as a state, how do we worry about minority groups? When it comes to even people that are outside of our circle, outside of our community, how do we think about them? Because that ultimately leads to Noah's sin, the sin of Noah's generation, which is collective, which ultimately looks at societal. What happens next? Those are the responses. Those are what happens to us. The first three letters. The next three letters is how we are to respond. Because ultimately, responsibility is the ability to respond. Acharai. Acharai is very famous in the Israeli army. In many other armies, the person that's leading the way, the person that's the commander, they sit in a control center and they tell the soldiers what to do. Or they come from the back because they actually have a better view. In the Israeli army, famously, the commander leads from the front and he screams out, Acharai, after me. You follow me. Lead by example. This is parallel to the Aleph, me, myself, and I. We have to act personally, not just accept the responsibility, but act it and make sure we show it. Acharav, we add the next letter. Aleph, Chet, Reish, Yud, Vav. After him, after her, after them. After someone else. We need ourselves to have role models. It's not enough for ourselves to build ourselves as role models for others, but we need to find role models in our own lives that we can choose to look up to. Not only that, that we can have people in our lives, whether it's our spouses, whether it's our children, whether it's our parents, whether it's our friends, whether it's our teachers, that we can come and be vulnerable and be honest and discuss these important areas of our life so that we can say acharav. So there's an objective person that can think with us. And finally, all of this comes together to make the word achrayut. Responsibility. Responsibility in the full sense, in the collective sense. It's interesting that achrayut starts with an aleph and it ends with a taf, right? It starts with the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet and it ends with the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And that is because this is a journey of me, myself, through to my sibling, through to the other, through to being after me, follow me, after him or her or them, someone else. And finally, achrayut, responsibility. We saw it through Adam and Eve in terms of the sin against objective morality and the importance of personal responsibility. We saw it in Cain and Abel in terms of the sin against subjective morality, natural ethics, and in terms of interpersonal responsibility, how we look after one another. And finally, Noah's Ark. And the ultimate solution is to build. In this case, to build an ark where you care about the other. But each of us in our own lives need to build something to be able to safeguard and help others safeguard, to not just look after ourselves and our family, but even animals, even things beyond us and other people beyond. And that is the only way we can truly heal this fractured world around us. I think what we see from the beginning of the Torah is, number one, a revolution, bringing this whole concept to being. But number two, the evolution, humanity evolving in terms of responsibility, from personal to interpersonal to societal. But unfortunately, it was almost the opposite of an evolution. We learned about how to grow by actually doing the opposite, by degenerating one scene at a time. And I think that if we look at the world around us, if we look at ourselves as individuals, we've never seen crises like this before. And the response needs to be a responsibility. It's our ability to respond. As Viktor Frankl famously said when he developed logotherapy in his famous book, Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl, who survived the Holocaust and looked at it as an opportunity to think about how we can find meaning in our lives. He says between stimulus and response, there's a period of time. And that period of time is up to us to decide what we're going to do. Too many of us have stimulus and response at the same time. As a stimulus hits, we respond. But no, the ability to respond is to pause and to appreciate and to think about how we need to do it. As we start Bereshit from the beginning, as we start with Genesis, I think it's more relevant for this time than ever before. And I hope that something here resonated with one of you that can allow each of us to be inspired and hopefully inspire others to take on the personal, interpersonal, and collective responsibility to heed the call of Ayeka. When God asked the question, I didn't ask of it. He says, where are you? Right? God knows where they were, but they were hiding from themselves. It's time for us as a society, for us as a family, and for us as individuals to answer the question of Ayeka, of where are you? Not because we're hiding, because we know where we are and because we're accepting responsibility. Thank you guys so much for learning together. This is really a privilege and a pleasure. Thanks for the awesome readers and those that shared ideas. If anyone wants to share a thought or a question, we can do so for a few minutes, so please do. And then we're going to end it. I always think less is more, so I want to end before the end of the hour. But we've got a few minutes. If anyone has any thoughts, how this relates, any questions or something that resonated.
The framework, that's from you or that's from somewhere else?
I didn't make it up, but I don't know where I saw it. I saw it a very long time ago.
That's very good. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Benji, thank you so much for taking the lead and bringing the J back into JFN, because we definitely need the infusion and we need the knowledge and we need your leadership. So, on behalf of all of us, thank you so much for coming forward and taking the first step as we mark the beginning of the Torah. And I hope that we can continue and keep going parsha parsha, with you and continue the learning.
Thank you so much, Shauna, for the impetus to make this happen. I'd love if anyone wants to share afterwards. If people would want to do parsha by parsha, it might be a bit too much of a commitment. I can see Sean is in. But if people would want to do something once a month, if people would want to do something once in a while, if people don't want to do something, if you got any feedback, please send me an email, WhatsApp, whatever. Let me know. And I just want to say, I know that not everyone here knows everyone here, but I happen to have a sense of everyone here. And besides the fact that they're all over Israel, America, England, South Africa, and bringing the whole globe together, this small, intimate group, Margaret Mead said, never underestimate the power of what one group can do to change the world. This small group really are absolute leaders, shakers, philanthropists, incredible people. And really, on behalf of the Jewish people, as we start the Torah, thank you for allowing this heartbeat to continue, the lev of the Torah. Thank you for the work you do. And I hope that, and I know that the responsibility that you live, I almost feel like I was preaching to the converted here, but I guess it was nice to ground it in the Torah. But really, thank you for the amazing opportunity and everything you do. And I also know that everyone here is extremely busy. So thanks for taking the time together to learn. And I hope we can continue to not just go through life, but grow through life together on this journey. So thank you so much. Shana Tova, and looking forward to the next opportunity.
Thanks, Benji.